Okay, Professor Hanke,
Yes.
it's good to have you here at the Laissez Faire Books Whiskey Bar. It's been a long time since we've talked. I've been reading your stuff. It's all over the news about the Iranian hyperinflation. This seems to be your beat.
Well, money and inflation is my beat, and hyperinflation is kind of a special subsegment of that. And we just finished recently with one of my young associates a big table that includes all the hyperinflations that have ever existed in the world. And there are 56 episodes in the table, and then there's one footnote, and that is for North Korea. That really is a 57th episode. We know it happened. We have a fairly good handle on it, but the quality of the data weren't up to par, so we didn't really include it in the table. And now we have Iran, which if this persists for another month or so, the situation that's developed there with the exchange rate and hyperinflation will have a 58th country.
Well,
Jeffrey, just pardon me for interrupting.
Not at all.
You said, well, is that your beat? And it is my beat in the sense that, let's say we've had 57 episodes of hyperinflation, and by my count, I've been associated with stopping 10 of them. So that's about 18% of all known world hyperinflations I've had the opportunity to stop.
Well, we're glad you're an American, because we might be using you in the years ahead here.
Well, you see, most people don't understand. Even in the Greenback era, in the Civil War, we've never reached more than an inflation rate of about 40% per month in the United States, and you have to hit 50% per month to hit the magic hyperinflation threshold. So the U.S., even in the worst of times, didn't quite make it.
Is there some term that's in between inflation and hyperinflation that describes, 15, 20%?
Well, I'd say 15 to 20%, I would just say is high inflation. Very high inflation would be, for example, like if you look from 1979 until 1991, in Yugoslavia had very high inflation. The average inflation rate was about 79%. During that period, the record average rate was Zaire. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was low triple digits, but so that's very high inflation. And then hyperinflation, of course, is what I just mentioned.
Well, we've got a number of live viewers. We've got a chat room. I'd like to invite them to ask any questions along the way, and those will be relayed to me as we go along here. But let's turn to the Iranian situation. You have a chronology on your Cato blog article that essentially starts this whole process in 2008 with the imposition of sanctions. Is that right?
Yes, the sanctions kind of ramp up. They start really in 2008, but the critical point in that same article is that July 10th, 2010, that's when President Obama signed the Comprehensive Iranian Sanctions Accountability and Disinvestment Act. And the reason July 2010 is important is that prior to that, the black market rate, which, by the way, is the only free market price in Iran, is the black market rate for foreign exchange. All the other prices are subsidized, controlled, policed. They're really not free market. They're what I call lying prices. They're not telling a true, objective free market story. So 2010, the official exchange rate and the black market exchange were very close to each other. They're about 10,000 Iranian rial to the dollar, and then they started to diverge, with the black market rate becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. And then in September of this year, we had on September 2nd, we had a real sell-off of about 9.6% in the real, and then 2 weeks ago it lost about 40% over a weekend. So those are situations in which there really was a currency panic, like a bank run. Those big drops where you're getting 10, 15% a day, that's like a bank run. Now what does that mean analytically? It means that we have this background of the central bank pumping money into the system and creating a background of very high inflation. Okay, back to the definitions. Very high inflation. But then, boom, all of a sudden we have a big 1 day or 2 day or weekend sell-off where you get a collapse in the currency, and then you jump yourself into hyperinflation, because you can calculate the implied inflation rate by knowing the change or deltas in the foreign exchange market. So what happens during those panics? Well, the demand for the Iranian rial collapses. And when the demand collapses, and of course the central bank can't control the money supply that quickly, the demand collapses, the supply stays quite strong, and boom, the exchange rate collapses on you.
Yes, and in just an instant, actually, which your comments immediately brought to mind Bernanke's various claims that he could stop an inflation in the U.S. that should have become a problem, practically overnight. Which, I mean, your comments suggest that would not be true, but I don't want to.
That's exactly right. This is a very important point you're raising now. If I could elaborate for just a minute, most people think. And they got this, I think, from our friend Milton Friedman, of course, a great Friedman, was a monetarist, and his work suggested, and he used the phrase that inflation was always a monetary phenomenon. It is. There's no question about that. But then he added, but it's hard to predict when the inflation is going to come as a result of changes in the money supply, because there are long and variable lags between changes in the money supply and inflation. But this is just not right. And Iran is one point. But let's go back to, you mentioned Bernanke in the United States. In the United States, when Lehman collapsed in September of 2008, and until the first of the year, the U.S. dollar had a dramatic strengthening against the euro. It went up about 28% against the euro. And as a result of that going up, that increase in the value of the dollar, commodity prices collapsed. Remember, we were at all-time highs in oil prices, and the price of gold collapsed, and all the other commodities collapsed. And we went from a situation where the month-over-month inflation rate in the United States was running at about 5.5%, and by February, that was in the fall of 2008, and by February of 2009, we actually were deflating in the U.S. economy. The price level, the CPI, was registering negative numbers.
Yeah.
So it's the exchange rate that counts and can dominate the situation, and it moves very fast, and the CPI will react very fast to dramatic changes in an exchange rate.
Meanwhile, central bankers are always driving, looking in the rearview mirror.
Well, the problem with Bernanke is, there are many problems. We don't have time to get into that. Yeah. But the big problem with Bernanke is that he on his dashboard of the things that he's looking at, he is not looking at the exchange rate. And the most important price in the world is the dollar exchange rate, and in particular, the dollar-euro rate. The dollar-euro rate is very important, and Bernanke isn't even watching it. He doesn't care where it is, because he's following his religion of inflation targeting, and as long as the general CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is running around 2%, he doesn't care about anything else. So you can have wild fluctuations in the dollar's exchange rate, which means by definition you will have wild fluctuations in commodity prices, because almost all commodities are invoiced and priced in dollars. So even if nothing else happens and the dollar starts swinging around violently vis-a-vis the euro, you get huge changes in commodity prices, and that's why we had this kind of Austrian bubble situation developing from the end of 2002 until the summer of 2008. You had the U.S. dollar declining by 45% in value between the end of 2002 and July of 2008 relative to the euro.
That's interesting.
And what happened? We had a huge commodity price bubble going up with, of course, by July, with the rice prices hit a world record high. We had gold, of course, was going through the roof. We had oil at $147 a barrel, hitting a record. And that was all associated with the dollar-euro exchange rate. Not all, because I looked at this, and about 55 to 60% of the commodity price movement in that period, 2003 through July of 2008, that was all the result of the dollar-euro exchange rate and the weak dollar.
So you've got, in Iran, you've got the regime attempting to enforce a kind of a fixed exchange rate regime, but what's and unsuccessfully so. What's going on the streets? I mean, do we have an attempt to enforce a certain currency exchange rate and stamp out the black markets, or what's going on?
Well, yeah, with Iran, you see, it's a police state, of course, and their instincts are to use the police. So now we have actually three rates that exist, three main exchange rates. One is the official rate, and that, if you're lucky enough to be buying pharmaceuticals and certain food items, you can get that rate from the central bank. And then there's another rate that's much lower, that is you can do the exchange at licensed exchange shops. And then there's a third rate, which is a black market rate. Well, the police are trying to keep the black market as constrained as they possibly can. And even though some shops are licensed to do foreign exchange at this other designated level, they're having trouble because the dealers don't want to deal. It's a bad deal, because the black market rate is obviously a lot lower than what these shops are mandated to exchange at.
Do you have any figures from the Iranian central bank? I mean, are those official, or do you know what's going on in terms of money pumping?
Oh no, no one has a clue. The official numbers, if they were even true, stopped in late 2011. But that's not very important, Jeffrey. As long as we have a free black market, that's the only objective thing we know that's coming out of Iran. It's a market price is an objective value, and it's formed by the subjective expectations of buyers and sellers. So you have the Austrian subjectiveness coming in through the buyers and sellers, and bang, once the market is made and there's a market price, the price is objective. It's a real piece of objective information. And that's, of course, the beauty of a black market or a free market. Now, the problem that we're running into is that the police have really gotten pretty tough with the black market. So the volume is low. So we're getting, I had a price today that I'm very satisfied with, that it's reliable and everything. But the thing there's a little bit of an art to interpreting the price, and that is, it's objective. There's no question about that. But the volume is low, And when you have low volume, the price is not as meaningful as when obviously you have a lot of transactions taking place.
But you have to assume there was some kind of regime change that occurred, or policy shift after 2008 in monetary policy on the part of the government.
Oh, they were pumping.
Yeah, they were pumping. So
there's no question about it. They were pumping, and as I say, the background to these currency panics that have occurred in September and October, the background has been one of general, inflating the money supply, let's say.
Well, what do you see as, and somebody in the chat room just asked this question, what do you see as the relationship between the change in the monetary policy or the policy of the Iranian government, central bank, and the imposition of sanctions? You see those as related events?
Well, I really haven't thought it through. I think it's kind of an irrelevant question, to tell you the truth. The sanctions seem to be mixed up in all of this. And in a way, sanctions, you can say on the one hand, are having an effect. I mean, there is a correlation, for example, with the July 2010. You've had many layers of sanctions by many countries and organizations and so forth. And it looked like this 2010 July sanction that I mentioned earlier was kind of a tipping point kind of thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't 2008, by the way. That's not the right date.
Right.
It's 2010 July.
Okay.
And it's then when you get a divergence between the black market and the official rate, and so you know something is going on. What exactly, I don't know, and I don't care, because all I'm looking at is the objective price data from the black market. Everything else is fiction. And you have to realize that in Iran, the signal-to-noise ratio is almost zero. So even for people who are there to tell you what actually is happening or what will happen next is delusional almost. They can't. And that's why every once in a while they want to get out of the rial and get into gold or the U.S. dollar. Ironically, the U.S. dollar, by the way. What do they want? They want dollars. What's the unit of account in Iran now? The unit of account is dollars. Everyone's calculating in their head the dollar, the rial dollar rate, and even if you're paying and transacting in rials, your calculator is working off of the Iranian rial dollar rate, and so that means by definition that's the unit of account, the dollar.
Now everybody's worried in this country, as you know, about a possibility of war with Iran. I mean, all the events seem to parallel more or less what happened with Iraq. Do you see a hyperinflation situation in Iran as something that would make war more likely or less likely, or how do you see that playing out politically?
My view on this is that the first thing is I think you can make an argument, a valid argument, that sanctions are a causal factor driving the exchange rate and people's expectations in Iran. Okay, so that's one thing. But the point you have to remember is that that's fine, but sanctions are always counterproductive. And what happens is that you tighten the noose, and pretty soon everyone who had sympathy with you is against you, and you become the bad guy. Now, how do you think Castro and the communists have stayed in the saddle so long, and Cuba? It's because of U.S. sanctions. And history is replete with these things. Sanctions just are counterproductive. In addition to that, in the case of Iran, they create lots of collateral damage because, number one, they get Big Brother looking into the banks and regulating banks and fining banks and so forth. So it's very costly for the banks. It's also costly for certain allies that we have, like Dubai. Dubai does, they were doing over $22 billion worth of trade with Iran every year. and that's probably been cut by half or maybe even more now. And so Dubai is our friend. Well, the sanctions are hurting our friend. They're paying the price. About the only ones who really benefit unambiguously from sanctions are the bureaucrats who have to police the thing.
Right. Well, and yet it's the policy of the U.S. government and I suppose the UN today.
Or our allies, the allied powers. In this case, I think Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, probably has the most sensible and most informed position. And as difficult as it would be, the Russian position is to engage the Iranians and try to come to some negotiated resolution of this terrible problem. Because in this case, you see, sanctions actually are not only counterproductive, but they're very dangerous. And they're very dangerous because ultimately the Iranians have the ace up their sleeve. And what is that? And that is, if we squeeze, shut down all of their oil exports, make it impossible for them to export oil, then they can easily shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and right away, 35% of all the world's oil is cut off, 20% of all the liquefied natural gas being shipped in the world is cut off, and you have a catastrophe, you have absolute chaos. It would be bigger than any bomb we have in our arsenal going off if the Strait of Hormuz was shut. And there would be very little cost to shutting it for the Iranians if they weren't allowed to be shipping any oil, for example.
Well, that's a terrifying scenario because that leads to global war. I mean, that's potentially catastrophic.
Yes, but that's why I say these sanctions are not like the garden variety sanctions that you're imposing on Cuba. These are very dangerous.
Yeah. Well, ideally, then, what we'd have is an open policy that could send, for example, some good Austrian economists over there to straighten out the monetary policy.
Well, I think that would be a low probability event. I mean, that's what I did. For example, I like my Bulgarian anecdote. I was President Stoyanov's advisor in Bulgaria. Right. And all these currency reforms that I've done are very totally Austrian and free market in nature, and that's the currency board system. So in 1997, hyperinflation was peaking out in Bulgaria at 242% a month. Now in Iran now, to get a handle on this, remember I said it was about 70% per month. Yeah. So Bulgaria was 242. We put in July 1st of 1997 a currency board system in which the Bulgarian lev was issued by the currency board. It traded at an absolutely fixed rate with the Deutschmark, and it was backed 100% with Deutschmark reserves. And it was freely convertible. It was totally free exchange. So in that case, it's just like a gold standard where you issue a currency that's fully convertible at a fixed rate into gold. And in that case, the currency you're issuing is a clone of gold. And in this case, in Bulgaria, the Bulgarian lev was a clone of the Deutschmark. Mm-hmm. And the hyperinflation stopped the same day. And by the end of July, just in one short month, the interest rates in Bulgaria were in high single digits. So it's that's a total free market solution, a total Austrian. I can comb through Mises and some of these new works that have been coming out. Richard Ebling's been editing these 3 volumes. That Liberty's been publishing. I guess a competitor of yours, but. They're fine volumes, and if you dig through there, you can see that it's exactly the way Mises was thinking about these things.
Yeah, and of course, ideally, you'd do it. One of the problems is that I suppose under a currency board system is that you link it with somebody like the dollar that's already potentially a vulnerable currency, then
Well, you could. I've written an article. You could have a gold-based currency board where you were backed 100% with gold. But the trouble I have with a lot of Austrian diehards and camp followers is that they're not very realistic. I mean, the dollar is the world's currency. You might not like the dollar. You might not like the Fed. You might not like Bernanke. You might not like a lot of things, but it beats anything else out there.
Yeah, and it certainly beats the Iranian currency today, anyway.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point. And you have to ask, if you're an Austrian or a libertarian, you have to ask, well, what are people freely choosing on the street? You said, what's going on in the street? You asked me earlier.
Yeah.
And what they're doing freely on the street, they're choosing the dollar.
Yeah, sure.
So that's the end of the story. There's a free market, and they're choosing two things, by the way: gold and dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gold and dollars is the game in Tehran.
Do you see any prospect for any kind of political revolution in Iran anytime soon, or do you see the events as having entrenched the regime even deeper?
Usually the sanctions will entrench the regime. Now the question is, well, how do you define the regime? And there, it's a very murky situation because you've got the priesthood is one power base, and you've got the government's another power base. You have competing factions, and it will be very hard to sort this out. And I think anyone who says they have an idea of what's really going to happen is kind of foolish, because, as I said earlier, the signal-to-noise ratio in Iran is almost zero, and it's a very, very murky situation. But the one thing, in a generic way, at 30,000 feet, we can have a pretty good idea that those who are imposing sanctions and hurting the average Iranian are not going to be viewed by the average Iranian as, warm and fuzzy creatures.
Right. Well, now, Dr. Hanke, if people want to find out to follow your blog, they go to Cato, and you've got your own blog there. It's easy to find on the website?
Yes, if you go to the homepage, the Cato blog that everyone associated with Cato, all the staff uses. So it's not an exclusive franchise that I have.
Okay.
My colleagues at Cato are all on the blog, and you can read them. But you can the easiest way, if you don't want to, if you're hyper focused on hyperinflation, then you go to the homepage and it says experts, and you punch that thing, and then you go down and find my name, Steve Hanke, and punch that, and then you get into all of it. So whatever you need, you find.
I think people can follow you on Twitter. They can check out your. Suppose you've got a Facebook page too. You write frequently in Forbes too. I think we've got one last question before we close things up. Is that right, Mark?
Yep. Free market in the USD. Please elaborate.
Free market in the USD. Free market in the US dollar. I'm not sure what that question amounts to, but I guess somebody's asking about what a free market in the US dollar would look like. Is that right, Mark?
There is a free market in the U.S. dollar right now. It happens to be the supplier is a government monopoly.
Yeah.
But once the supply has been produced by the government monopoly, it's a free market. I mean, there's no question about it.
Ideally,
now the one thing that's important, by the way, this is another topic. We'll have to do another session sometime, but. Most people don't understand that the total money supply in the United States, about 85% of it, is produced by private banks.
Right.
Only 15% now is accounted for by state money. 85% is bank money. So keep that in mind. That's very important.
Yeah.
So a lot of people say, oh, we're going to hyperinflate in the United States. You know, the Fed, since Lehman collapsed, has more than tripled the amount of state money in the economy. And this is just foolish, nonsensical thinking, because the total money supply is only accounted for by 15% being state money and 85% bank money. And bank money has actually been declining and shrinking since Lehman.
Sure.
And the amount of the huge expansion in state money that's occurred with the Fed has not been enough to offset that decline. So as a result, the total money supply in the United States now is more or less about 7%, running a 7% deficiency. And that's why the economy won't move. Money matters. And we have a deficiency of total money supply in the U.S. economy because bank money is shriveling. And why is it shriveling? Because we have a very tight rein on banks with this Dodd-Frank legislation has been a killer. And the Basel capital requirements in Basel III that regulate the amount of capital relative to assets that banks have to have, we are squeezing. So we have a very tight monetary policy on the biggest chunk of the money supply and a very loose monetary policy on state money, Fed money, which is the smallest part of the money supply. The overall thing is one of tightness. The overall thing is one that it will result in anemic economic growth at best and maybe even a recession.
We've got an article coming out tomorrow about the plight of regular people can't get mortgages, for example.
Yeah, we're in a credit crunch.
Yeah.
So you have to ask, some of these people who are fanatics jumping around about we're going to hyperinflate any second because of the Fed. You have to ask them, well, why can't you get a mortgage? Why do we have a credit crunch? It's because they haven't studied anything very carefully and don't understand it.
Regulations are very tight. Well, Dr. Hanke, thank you so much for being with me. It's wonderful to see you again, and also thank you for caring about this stuff that hardly anybody seems to be following but you. So everybody's grateful to you for this.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeffrey. Okay. Great to be with you. And I'll see you the next time for coffee in Baltimore.
Let's do it. Okay, thanks, Dr. Hanke. Bye-bye.
Bye.